Welcome, closers. We are live. I am super excited to be doing this interview with my friend Max Nussenbaum. Max, where are you joining us from today?
I am joining us from all of you from the beautiful city of Detroit. We are in the Milwaukee Junction neighborhood, aka the Junk, as we like to call it, just on the outskirts of downtown.
Awesome. All right, sunny Detroit. So, guys, a couple of housekeeping notes here. You can ask questions down below. You can and you should submit questions down below. We will feed those over to Max and review those towards the end. Max is going to be presenting at the PM Grow Summit. That is actually how I was introduced to this fine young man. And Max, let's just start there. What are we going to be talking about at the PM Grow Summit?
Absolutely. Well, I'm really looking forward to the summit. I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are as well. As a quick 30 seconds of background, I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Castle, and we're basically a tech-powered property management company in Detroit. So we manage rental property for landlords, but we use technology to make that process way more affordable, way more efficient, and a way better experience for owners and tenants. At the Grow Summit, I'm going to be talking a bit about Castle's sort of dual identity as a tech company and as sort of a physical real-world real estate company, and about how I think we're a very small piece of a much broader trend, which is that sort of every company is becoming a tech company. Technology started out as this own little isolated world. Now it doesn't even really make sense to speak of the tech industry. There is no such thing. Tech is getting into every industry, and where you had in the early 2000s, the 90s, you had all the big tech companies were like pure tech, right? Things like Google or Facebook. Now all the big opportunities are taking tech and bringing it into the real world in the way that companies like Uber and Airbnb and hopefully us in a very small degree are doing. So I'm excited to dive even deeper into that at the Grow Summit.
Okay, great. Well, right now let's dive in more specifically on your background. You are going to be at the PM Grow Summit both talking, but originally I asked you to come to sit on a bleeding edge technology panel, and you are on a short list of people that I thought were ideal for this, specifically because of what you mentioned, the dual identity of not just being focused on the service, but having a huge tech play here as well. But rewind the tape for me a little bit. How did you actually get into property management?
Yeah, so we were chatting before this kicked off, you and I, Jordan, about how one of the things I love about real estate is that most people in real estate have a really interesting kind of winding path into how they got into it, right? It's not like being a lawyer where you just study it in school and then you go do it. I certainly am a real example of that. I had a very winding path into this industry. Basically, this started for me when I moved to Detroit, which I did right after college. I'm not from the area originally. I'm actually from Boston originally. I moved here right after college as part of a program called Venture for America, which connects recent graduates with startup companies in emerging cities around the country, including Detroit. And even that was sort of a new adventure for me. I hadn't really done anything related to startups or business in school, but it seemed like a cool opportunity. And I'm a big believer that really the best way to find exciting opportunities in life is to follow the people, not the specific thing. And that's what sold me on BFA, was that I met the other fellows doing the program and thought they were just some of the smartest, most talented, most interesting people I'd ever met. And I was going to follow them. They could all be going to janitorial school. I was going to do whatever they were doing. I'm a big believer in the idea that you become the average of the 5 people that you hang out with the most.
Absolutely.
You got to just surround yourself with the right people. So I was working at a tech startup in Detroit that had nothing to do with real estate. But, as any of you guys watching who've ever been to Detroit, I'm sure will know, you can't spend much time in Detroit without getting interested in real estate, even if you weren't to begin with. I mean, just everything related to the city has to do with real estate. It's all around you. It's facing challenges that are similar to what many other cities are facing, but just on a much larger scale. And so my future co-founders at Castle, although at the time they were just friends, and I, in the summer of 2013, we bought an abandoned mansion in the Detroit tax auction, a 7-bedroom mansion. We picked it up for $8,000. Now, it was totally destroyed. So we put about 2 years and a lot more than $8,000 into fixing it up. Didn't know anything about real estate, didn't know anything about construction, but Detroit is just the kind of place where there's sort of this magical can-do attitude, and it's the kind of place where 4 23-year-olds can buy an old house and fix it up even though they don't know anything about real estate. That was just a passion project for us, but we quickly got pretty embedded in the real estate community, both in Detroit and in Michigan, and also just talking to connections all around the country. And we heard everyone issue the same complaint, which was people love investing in real estate, but they hate being a landlord. It's a big pain, and they don't want to use a property management company either. None of those companies seem trustworthy, up to date. They're all kind of stuck in the 1980s at best. We, looked briefly into some other management companies, and there was no way we were going to hand the keys over to this, house that we'd painstakingly restored to kind of one of these companies. And, with our kind of technology backgrounds, that sort of led us to the idea that, hey, maybe there's an opportunity to do something a little bit differently in this industry. So we took on our first unit under management in January of 2015, and that grew pretty rapidly since then. Currently manage about 700 units in the metro area, and gearing up for launch in another market somewhere else in the US next year. The disclaimer I always give is that when I tell the story like that, it sounds like this very nice and smooth narrative, but the real road, as you know, Jordan, from starting your own business, the real road has far more bumps than that smooth story makes it sound.
Now, I want to get into some of those bumps down the road here, but start date. Tell me that start date one more time, when you actually started managing the first property.
So we had started the company in the end of 2014, but we actually took on our first unit under management in the beginning of January 2015. I don't know the exact date, somewhere in the beginning of the year.
Got it. And you're at around 700 properties managed right now?
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. So, Max, tell me this. I feel like this is kind of a big, broader macro level issue. Why is there outside capital flowing into this industry, which you represent as a funded company? There are a lot of people, smart people standing behind you and saying, yes, this is worth placing a bet on. Describe for us the opportunity that folks are seeing, not just in tech, because we get tech, another piece of property management software, but specifically for investing capital in the stodgy, old, service-based business, which in general isn't super attractive to a lot of VC shops.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you're right that it historically hasn't been attractive. I think you are seeing a change there, though, in my experience.
Agreed.
And I think in part that's because of kind of the stuff I talked about earlier, which is that there are, tech is now kind of eating the rest of the world, and there are big opportunities and huge markets. I mean, you think about the amount of rental. I mean, everyone is a tenant at some point in their lives. It's around 1 in 15 Americans who owns rental property. Property management in the United States is like a $45 billion market, and most owners don't even use property management, right? So huge market opportunities. I think the other factor that's coming into play is that, a lot of these pure tech products, if you were starting, if you were starting sort of a classic like pure tech company in 2000, your competition was old school companies, right? If you're starting a pure tech company now, your competition is Google and Amazon and Apple and Facebook, and those companies are going to be a lot harder to unseat than the sort of companies who hadn't learned the lessons of the web era 10 and 20 years ago. So I think people are seeing that there's for sure one of our advantages, one of the reasons we picked this industry is that like the bar is low, right? I mean, it's not like, obviously Castle is a great service, but when you're doing a startup, like you have to be building something that people want so badly that they'll even hire a group of 20-year-olds with no experience to do it, right? And I think the other component, which I would be remiss to mention and has nothing to do with Castle's opportunity, our own talents of the team, anything like that, is just that it's hard to find good returns in most asset classes right now. And so a lot more money than historically has been the case is pouring into angel investing and venture capital. And that means there are, there are just, people are looking in places they weren't before. And that's sort of a pushing factor for people to look for kind of other opportunities.
So how much has Castle raised to date, and do you guys plan on raising more in the future?
Yeah, so we've raised just under $3 million in a couple different rounds. The most recent was a $2.2 million seed round led by Coastal Ventures, a VC in the Valley that we raised coming out of YC in April of this year. In general, my philosophy about fundraising is that it can be a great tool to grow your business, but you don't want to get sort of addicted to the money pipe, right? So I anticipate Castle raising more in the future, but I think that the ideal way to raise money is to build something that works and then have very specific goals and aims that are going to be furthered by that raise. You know, what we aim to do on this raise is really nail the model, prove that it can work in multiple markets, and then go raise a much larger round of capital, not to just keep the existing business alive, but to specifically fund kind of expansion into additional markets, right? Take the model that's working and scale it up. You know, one thing YC says, which I'm a big believer on, is you should act like every round you raise is the last one, because it might, it could be. And, you know, from everything I know from talking to other entrepreneurs, it only gets harder, right? Raising that next round is always harder than the last one. So we try not to be reliant on it, but we've been very lucky to have the opportunity so far. And I anticipate, you know, at least attempting to raise money again.
Right, the bar gets higher and higher, so the more money you take on, the bigger the exit has to be to justify it. That totally makes sense. So you have taken on this funding, though, and to a lot of people watching this, they hear the number 3 million and not thinking, like you said, seed round. And I guess you know, seed rounds have gotten bigger over time. But you know, you could do something with 3 mil. So what is Castle doing with that funding that is both similar and different to what a traditional property management company does?
Absolutely. So I'll kind of break it down. I'd like to kind of break it down into two batches of money, right? The you know, initial amount we raised was around $600,000, actually in 2 separate rounds, about 300 each, just mostly from angel investors. And you know, that early money, that first $300,000 we raised was on, frankly, very bad terms. We gave away a lot of the company to do it. You know, unfortunately, shouldn't say unfortunately, we're very lucky to have even had that opportunity. Most people don't, but we were in a position where we were starting this company as, you know, 24-year-olds. We had been working jobs that were paid, you know, we had been working jobs before that paid in the $30,000 range in Detroit.
Nice.
We were lucky enough not to have any significant amounts of debt, but we didn't really have any savings. There wasn't any way we could really effectively support ourselves. I think it'd be much better. It's much better to be able to put away enough money to just work on something for 6 months and then raise based on traction instead of needing it up front. We were very lucky to be able to get money to pursue our idea and to basically just pay ourselves subsistence wages while we worked on it. But it's certainly not, I think if you have the option not to do that, I highly recommend it. Oh, excuse me, just one moment, guys. Gotta
no worries.
So then the kind of next batch was sort of the $2 million round that we raised after YC. And, you know, the main purpose of that round was really to invest in our technology, right? The business is doing a substantial amount of revenue. You know, it's not like we're one of those companies that doesn't make any money and is 100% reliant on fundraising. But you know, we wanted to be able to hire developers, invest in kind of building out the platform, and also stay a little bit ahead of growth in terms of hiring, right? So we want to be able to, when we find a great person, hire them now, even if we might not need them for a month. And especially because we've been growing so fast, you know, we didn't want to be in a position where we had to say, hey, some people want to sign up, but you have to wait until we have the money to bring on people who can support that, because there is a lag time for us. If you think about, you know, we might close a client, we invest a significant amount of time up front in onboarding them, getting the property set up, and then it's going to be a few weeks before we start generating revenue from that property, right? Now that said, you know, there's no question we did not need the full $2 million. We were very lucky to be coming out of Y Combinator and in a position where it's much easier to raise money coming out of YC than not coming out of YC. I've done it both times, so I know that firsthand. And we were, you know, we were lucky enough to be able to get more money than we needed on relatively good terms. And I just view it as de-risking, right? Yes, we gave away more ownership than we would have otherwise, but I don't want to you know, I'll feel pretty stupid if we fail because the company runs out of money. And if we had just had 6 more months of runway, I thought we could have made it. And we ran out of money because I didn't want to give up that extra 2% ownership, right? So we viewed it as the best way, taking advantage of an opportunity while sort of times were good to put some money in the bank.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Here's another thing I'm curious about is, talk to me about some of the inflection points that you guys are past and the inflection points that are in front of you, where things, that linear progress, linear progress in the right direction, up and to the right is always good, but what are kind of the inflection points where things change and it gets a little bit rocky and you have to get your footing again before you can get to the next level?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's something I've been thinking about a lot was that there's really two total angles for that, right? There's some about the actual business fundamentals. There's others about just like internally keeping the company organized and running. So I'd like to kind of touch on both. I think the three big inflection points for the business was, one, when we proved that, like, when we went from, 0 to 10 customers to even just having more than 10. Those first 10 customers, every time someone called me, I prayed they wouldn't ask how many other properties we managed. And somehow we signed up 10 properties without anyone asking. The person who was our first property didn't know he was our first. And then even when we just had 10, it was like, yeah, we're a small company. We just got started, but we have 10 other properties, right? It gave us that baseline level of legitimacy. I think that the second big inflection point was when the technology actually became helpful to us. When we started out, we were doing everything manually, and all the technology was basically fake to make the owners have a good experience, right? The first version of our quote unquote app it looked like functional technology to the owners, but behind the scenes, we just entered all the information manually into the database, right? And then we were sort of scrambling. So, it was about 9 months in before we hit a point where it was like, oh, actually, this technology is speeding us up instead of slowing us down. And the third, I think, the third big one was when we, after we got past like 5 people and about 160 properties, we got to the point where we had to actually build like strong internal systems and like processes for a lot of things. So for example, in the early days, customers just, me and Tim, one of my co-founders, who's now our COO, just did all the management ourselves. Customers just emailed our personal email addresses, right? We, had to make a transition to having an actual support system and every customer having a dedicated account manager and having formal processes for inbound, for, onboarding and stuff. Those were kind of from the business. I think the other big one though is, just internal inflection point. Once we got to about 10, so we're a team of 18 right now for context. Once we got to about 10 people, we had to start we passed the point where just everyone always knew everything from being in the same room all day. And we had to introduce like actual management, right? We just had our all hands meeting today where we update everyone on what's going on. Different divisions of the company, the growth team, the dev team, the ops team, update each other. We had to build formal structures for that. And every company goes through this because once you get past a certain small size, it doesn't just happen automatically. And to me, those have been the sort of internal organizational challenges that I think would be relevant no matter what we were doing as a company. Have been some of the most interesting ones.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super, super helpful. Some really interesting stuff there. So let's get into what a lot of people here are still wondering is, again, what exactly are you doing with the $3 million? What are you building? How are you different? Do you drive a really nice car? Like, what's going on here?
No, we'll be very open about this. My co-founders and I pay ourselves each $45,000 a year. So we're trying to run a very lean operation. Now, we're not, in the poorhouse or anything. That's a comfortable salary to live on in Detroit, but we're certainly not getting rich off this yet.
So slightly above ramen money, but
it's above. So when the first year of the company, we paid ourselves $24,000 a year, and that was basically the bare minimum we needed to survive without feeling like we were actually like struggling to make it in Detroit. So it's an improvement. But
that's interesting because you picked the right city, right? That's not a San Fran play right there.
No, absolutely, and I'm a huge advocate of people starting companies outside Silicon Valley in part for that reason. You have so much more room to experiment without burning through a ton of money when you're somewhere where the cost of living is low.
So talk to me about the tech stack in layman's speak.
Absolutely.
What are you building?
Absolutely. So, I think that the best way to think about Castle is, while we're a technology company at heart, there's a heavy service component as well, right? So the core of our business is this property management platform. You can think of it as kind of like a Builder or an Appfolio or a Yardi, except where those guys sort of are building like a complex package that can work for the needs of any type of management company out there, from a guy with a few homes to a giant single family building, a giant multi-unit building. we're building the software to be completely integrated with our business model, and it's designed to make our team way more efficient at management and to give our owners way more transparency. So I think a great example is the way the application process works. Applicants can apply online to a castle property. The first part of the pre-screen is automatic. So they found out right away if they passed the screening. If they pass, they can schedule a showing. That showing then gets dispatched to what we call our stewards, basically on-demand workers from the community who can go do open houses, show properties. And so, basically what that means is that whole process from applicant being interested in the property all the way up until we have the one strongest applicant for the property, and we're going to do a little bit more of a manual check to that person's references and background. That's happening basically automatically without anyone's full-time attention on the castle team having to oversee the process. We've built similar things for rent collection, for maintenance. And the beauty of it is, it's not just that it makes us more efficient, it gives our owners way more transparency into what's going on, right? So when you're a castle owner and your property's on the market, you're getting a real-time feed of how many people have applied to your property. You're seeing a basically breakdown of what stages of the application process they're in. If someone has feedback after a showing, that's getting automatically dispatched to you. You can see when the next showing is. You can control the rents right from there. So, it's easy for our team to give that transparency because we don't have to go type all that information in. The same backend system that we're running our business on is the same thing that's showing our owners that. So, every castle customer has a dedicated account manager they work with. There's a heavy human and heavy service component to what we do, and that's never going to be eliminated entirely, nor would we want it to be in this industry. The goal is to take stuff that is amenable to automation, and frankly, there are many things that computers do better than humans, and automate that, and let our account managers focus on the stuff that really matters to investors, right? Every time an account manager is manually logging some rent payment in a ledger or manually reviewing some tenant's application, they're basically wasting time and brain power that could be being used for solving the real important challenges that face investors. And so our goal is to free up our account managers to kind of do that kind of stuff and automate away the easy bits.
All right, so digging into this further, for a lot of folks that are listening right now, they're thinking, you know what, I use technology. I'm not just writing everything down on paper, like the tenant side of things. I use Tenant Turner or ShowMojo, some of these other solutions that will do both the scheduling as well as some of the screening stuff. But one thing that's interesting here, right? So these folks are going from paper to building their own technology. There's something in between. They're doing something in between. But what you just identified is you own that data. You have bits of data right now that you're doing interesting stuff with, but you also have bits of data that 5 or 10 years you may be doing radically more interesting stuff with, or maybe a year from now. Talk to me about the power of data, and long-term, do you feel like this is going to be a strategic asset for you guys, what you're able to do with your data at scale?
Absolutely. I mean, when we think about what our job is, I'm a big fan of it's something called the Jobs to Be Done framework. It's by Clayton Christensen from Harvard Business School, who also came up with Innovator's Dilemma. Absolutely. And it's basically, the idea of that framework is basically that a person hires a product to do a job, and that may not be what the people making the product think the job is, right? A classic example is that most car manufacturers would say the job of the car is to get you from point A to point B, but you've got your 50-year-old man buying a Ferrari, and the job that he's hiring that car to do is to make him feel young or to make him attractive to women or something else, right? And it's totally disconnected. The fact that it takes you from point A to point B is almost incidental. We kind of use a similar framework to view our job, which is that I think of course, we provide services, but I think most property management is too oriented around services, right? Our job is not to find a tenant. It's not to put a tenant in the property. Our job isn't to collect rent. Our job isn't to coordinate maintenance. Those are all things we do, but our job is to help real estate investors achieve whatever their aims with their real estate investment portfolio are. And yes, that's going to involve all the services I just mentioned, but no one's hiring us. If we could somehow magically tell owners, hey, you know what, we're going to make you 40% annual ROI and we're going to keep your house empty the whole time, they would never say, oh, well, you're not putting a tenant in there, right? That's right. Those services are all how we do that job. And I think the data has the potential to be a huge component of that. There's really bad data about housing right now, and there's especially bad data about the rental industry, right? Rental comps are pretty bad. There's nothing about maintenance. we'd love to be able to help owners make intelligent decisions by using the data we have to say things like, hey, you're facing this maintenance issue and you could either replace this thing or do a repair. Well, we found on average that if you do a repair, it's going to need X amount of work again in X years versus the replacement is going to cost X upfront but last Y years. So if your goal is you're really just holding on to this for a year and then you want to flip, the repair is the most sense. But if your goal is to be a long-term buy and hold investor over the next decade, your 10-year ROI is actually going to be better if you make this upfront investment to do the full replacement, right? To take one example. And I think that stuff we're seeing little bits of that already, even just with 2 years of data for 700 units. I think that when we hit the next order of magnitude, there's a whole world of exciting opportunities that open up there. That's something that I'm personally really excited about.
Awesome. Yeah, a huge potential there for those that can actually reach that bar, although it is a very high bar. I like what you said a second ago about identifying with the most deepest core needs of your consumers, because effectively what you're saying there is, I don't want to be a commodity. I don't want to be a widget. I want to meet the deepest needs and desires. And when you go after that, there's leverage in that. You're established, not only are you more aware of what you truly need to be offering, but you're establishing a connection with the consumer that is so much deeper. And any good or service has the ability to either be commodified or to be a high margin profitable business, right?
Absolutely.
You have toilet paper and then you have Charmin's. You have Acme Property Management Company, and then you have a brand that consumers are actually engaged in and project all these positive values on.
Absolutely.
And that's so important because we're in an industry where there's this like kind of starting friction of distrust. Talk to me a little bit about that. How did that feel to go into an industry that actually had a starting position of kind of negative distrust?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something we talk about all the time. It's both an advantage and a disadvantage. It's an advantage because, again, the bar is low. I mean, we've had people leave us 5-star reviews without even becoming customers just because we were really honest with them on the phone, right? Mm-hmm. We have had people thank us for, we've had people bring us properties in Detroit that are in really questionable neighborhoods. And we say, look, we have to be honest with you. We can't effectively manage this property. We don't think anyone can place a good tenant in it. My honest advice is you're better off selling it at a loss than sinking even more money into trying to rent this out. And a lot of other management companies won't say that. They'd rather make $500 for putting the tenant in, make their fees for maintenance, and even while knowing it's not going to help the owner, right? I think too, a lot of it, so it's an advantage in that it enables us to stand out, and it's an opportunity. It's also a disadvantage in that we get tainted by association, right? We have oftentimes, we'll bring on an owner who's gotten really screwed by their previous management company, and they are going to be breathing down our necks for the first month. They start from a position of distrust, and I don't blame them. What we try to do is, I think it's very easy to say, okay, well, we're going to be honest and trustworthy people, and I don't think most management companies are outright dishonest. I think it's a much more subtle problem, which is one of misaligned incentives, right? We've tried to do is not just say, hey, we're going to be honest, but say, like, we've oriented our entire business around making sure our incentives are aligned with yours. The best example I can give is most management companies charge a percentage markup on maintenance, right? But that's crazy. That means the management company does better the more the owner spends on maintenance. And then if the owner is overpaying, the management company is profiting, right? So we don't take fees on maintenance, right? Because
so you do it, but you don't take fees?
Exactly. Now we work with a network of independent contractors and we pass on their bids to owners. So we're not insuring the property. It's not like, you're still paying for your maintenance, but we're not earning a cut of that, because if we're earning a cut, what's our incentive to get you the best deal, right? And I think that does three things. One is it sends the signal to our customers that our interests are aligned with theirs. I think more importantly, though, it enables us to, in the future, build a more advanced product without cannibalizing our own business, right? Investors, I think, would love some of the stuff I've talked about earlier about helping you better understand, making smart decisions for your return on investment. But no management company who's dependent on making fees from maintenance is going to develop a tool that helps their owners spend less on maintenance, right? So we're not doing this to be nice. We're doing this because I think those other tactics can work in the short term, but in the long term, you shoot yourself in the foot.
Good business is good business. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
And let's be honest here. You have the luxury of being well capitalized. So doing the right thing is a little bit easier because you have that runway. Ultimately, it comes down to integrity. But for some of these small mom and pop operators just getting off the ground, they're looking for small bits of revenue here to make it work. Last question from me before we go to questions from our audience. Talk to me a little bit about what it's like to be a young startup founder. Culturally, the startup scene has kind of become a meme at this point. Do you watch the HBO Silicon Valley show? Have you seen that?
Disturbingly close to my real life.
So we're at the point right now where people are very familiar with this idea of being a startup founder, but I just want to distill it down. Give me the highlights and give me some of the lowlights that you have dealt with thus far.
For sure. So I think we have very consciously separated ourselves from a lot of the traditional startup scene, right? Our main office is in Detroit. We are not, we're not a startup serving other tech companies. We're in an old school industry. And so it's funny because I'm a young startup founder, and the startup world, youth is valued, but in the sort of traditional real estate world, I definitely face skepticism for being young, right? So it's an interesting balance. I think, I've never been any older than this, but when I look at other entrepreneurs who are starting companies and they're in their late 30s or 40s and they have families and they have kids, I can't imagine how they do that, because this job is basically eats my entire life, but I'm relatively young. I don't have any other responsibilities. My co-founders are all my best friends. It's fun and it's an incredible opportunity. And I'm lucky to be at a point in my life where I'm able to sort of dive, wholeheartedly into something like that. I think we're very lucky too in that, I can criticize the Silicon Valley startup scene all I want and talk about how we've situated ourselves away from that. At the same time, we're in part able to do that because we did Y Combinator. We have some Silicon Valley investors, so we can be in Detroit, and yet those doors are open to us if we want. And I certainly don't begrudge anyone who doesn't have those things backing them. And it's like, what? I have to move my company to San Francisco so I can bump into some of these people on the street, right? So it's certainly not intended as a criticism of anyone else. But I think you have to be. I think to do anything like this, you have to start out pretty dumb and naive, because if you knew what was if I had known what the past 2 years were actually going to involve when I signed up to do it, I would have been like, hell no, I'm not doing that.
It's not entirely rational.
No, not at all. And so I think the inexperience and honestly stupidity of youth is an advantage there.
Okay, good way to frame it. Very, very honest of you. All right, so let's take some questions from the audience here. First question is from Nick Gaudreau. Hopefully I didn't butcher your last name there, Nick. His question is, what does your team see as the next big hurdles, and how do you plan to take those on?
Yeah, great question. I'll actually talk about, I think, two of them. One is which is an ongoing hurdle, but one we've really been dealing with in the past few months, is making sure our level of service doesn't backslide as we get larger. Classic regression to the mean, right? It's just harder to be excellent as you get bigger. And we, need to make sure that we are, in the early days, when you've got a few hundred properties and a team of 6, you can make sure every customer is getting incredible service through pure hustle. And if you're overwhelmed, you just work on the weekend that week, right? But that's not sustainable as we get larger. The ways that we're working on that are basically working on building. This is a project we're kind of working on now, is working on actually using sort of data and building intelligent systems to, for example, take one great example. We used to allocate properties to account managers just based on how many units were in their plate, right? We would say, okay, well, an account manager can oversee this many units. You've got that -1, here's 1. What we're actually learning now is that the real factor is way more complicated, right? Overseeing 40 properties that belong to one owner is way easier than overseeing 40 properties that belong to 40 different owners.
Sure.
Overseeing a property that's in the process of looking for a tenant is more difficult than one that has a good tenant who's been there for years, right? And so we're building a more advanced way to apportion that work and make sure that new units are being handed out to the person with the most capacity to oversee them, and therefore give the customer a great experience. And that's kind of just one example there. The other big hurdle for sure is going to be launch in our next market, which is likely happening at the beginning of next year. TBD on what market that will be, but we've always known from the beginning that the idea was to build this model in Detroit and then take it to other markets around the country. Our plan for that is, basically we're very lucky in that we have some customers now who have property in multiple markets around the country, and they are eager to have Castle in another market. I think that's another, tying back to what we were talking about before about cool opportunities. Right now, a lot of the savviest investors have property in multiple markets in the US, but they pretty much have to use a different management company in each market. So there's no way for them to get a high-level overview of how their entire portfolio is doing unless they build it themselves. We are going to do sort of a soft launch with partners who we're already working with, so that we have time to basically work out the kinks with existing customers before we open the floodgates to new people. There's often a tendency in the startup world, you've probably heard Facebook slogan, move fast and break things. I think that's great for Facebook when you're dealing with people's homes and people's livelihoods. You want to move a little slower and try not to break anything important. And so that's kind of the tack we're going to take.
Awesome. Okay, makes sense. Appreciate you getting specific there. Next question was from Alex Osenenko. What up, Alex? My co-host of the PM Grow Summit. And Alex's question is, Max, I'm curious on how do you set pricing and how much testing do you do with different pricing packages?
That's a great question, and actually points to something that we've been discussing internally, which is that I believe that pricing should always be an experiment, and I don't think we've done enough of that. So our current pricing is we charge a flat fee of $79 per unit per month. It's a pretty funny story about how that came about. When we first got started, we had no idea what our costs would be or how much to charge, and we were just like, let's give $49 a try. After the first 5 properties, we realized $49 was too low. And then we were like, all right, well, 59 is like not a big improvement from 49. 69 is like has some sexual connotations, so it seems like an embarrassing number to like put all over your website. So 79 it is, and it's been $79 a month ever since, right? We're kind of talking internally right now as we get a better understanding of our customers about. We understand that there are very different cost structures for us working with different kinds of customers, so it probably makes sense to have our pricing more accurately reflect those cost structures to our customers, so that the customers who put less of a burden on us are feeling those savings. I think we should do a lot more experimenting. I think it's something we're going to do in the next few months, as long as we stick to our ethos that none of the way we charge can make our incentives misaligned with those of our owners.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. We've definitely seen a proliferation of flat fee as a pricing structure as opposed to the traditional percentage-based management fee, and you can see, at least from the consumer's perspective, that it's more defined, it's static, right? So there's less like volatility or variability. And yeah, I guess that's what it has going in favor of it.
And that's exactly, it's funny, most owners do save money with Castle, but when people tell us why they like our pricing, it's not because it's cheaper. That's nice, but it's actually what you said, the predictability is much more important. Investors know at the beginning of the year exactly how much Castle is going to cost them, and there are enough surprises in real estate already. You don't need to be surprised by your management company's bill.
Sure, yeah, makes sense. All right, next question is from Brian. Our property managers do a significant amount of conflict resolution and communication. Do you have property managers on staff, or are you a completely automated software service?
It's a great question. And yeah, we have a dedicated account managers, a big team of them. Every customer gets a dedicated account manager they work with. So we're not 100% automated. We never will be. I don't think that would be desirable. Brian, I think you've hit a really good point, which is that we do the same thing. Like communication, conflict resolution, negotiation is in some ways just as much of a service we provide as anything practical, like coordinating maintenance or finding tenants. And certainly part of the think back to the jobs to be done framework, part of the jobs our owners are hiring us to do is to be sort of a neutral buffer between them and the tenants. So, our goal is to automate all the stuff that doesn't take much human decision making, so that our humans can be focused on all the kind of more soft skills that you're talking about that are really where, I'm sure you've experienced this, Brian, are really where you have the biggest potential to make a real impact on the customer experience, right? Getting a leak fixed, as long as the person does a good job and charges something reasonable, there's not really that much of a delta between different ways you can fix a leak. But, resolving a conflict with an owner is really where you can really sort of stand head and shoulders above the competition.
So talk to me a little bit more about labor efficiency and labor cost. Do you guys have any tiered labors just in terms of labor cost? Do you guys do any offshore outsourcing right now?
We do, yeah. So it's actually a big part of how we work as well. We have a team in the Philippines who answers our phones, and we also have basically a structure where every account manager has a customer support rep who works in the Philippines who is basically their assistant and can do things like, for example, call a utility company and wait for 40 minutes on hold to get a piece of information that the account manager needs, right? Or answer basic customer support questions that do not require a specific history and knowledge about the property, right? An applicant coming on our live chat and wanting to find out if this property allows pets, right? You don't need the whole context of the owner relationship to answer that kind of question. That said, we do our Philippines team is done in a very different way from the way most companies outsource, and it's actually different from any way I've ever seen this. Typically, the way that's done is people will have a call center or an outsourcing agency. We do not do that. So we individually interview and hire everyone on that team ourselves. They're technically contract employees because it's difficult to hire someone full-time overseas, but they work full-time for Castle. They make a salary that's significantly higher than what they'd make at a call center anywhere like that. And they're on our Slack, on our group chat.
A true team member.
True team member. They come into our all hands meetings, video chat. You'll see them on the team page. We know them all personally, and I know things about them. So we really want to make them an actual part of the team and not some outsourced like labor center.
And is that something that you knew you would do from day one? How long did it take you to get to working with outsourced labor?
No, absolutely not. What happened was that pretty quickly in we realized we were going to need help answering the phones, and someone suggested, hey, you should try hiring someone in the Philippines. And we found this was in December of 2015. Found this incredible woman, Anne, and quickly realized that she was incredibly talented and smart and could do way more than just answer the phones. And as I think everything with a startup, you try something and it works a little bit, and you kind of scale it up from there.
Right.
And that's kind of helped us. We just kind of went for it after we discovered that it was working out. And I will say too, I think people often, this kind of thing is often looked at as just a way to cut costs. There's no question that lower costs are a big component of why we do this, but it's also because, frankly, it's really hard to hire someone in the US who's going to just spend all their time being on the phone with utility companies. Like, it's not like we've got people banging down our door to have a full-time job doing that, and we're just hiring people in the Philippines because it's cheaper, right? That's certainly a component, but it's more complicated than that.
Interesting. All right, so I'm going to keep going here with other questions. Nick had a follow-up question. Is there ever going to be a play to sell the software you've developed, or do you plan to exclusively utilize it internally?
So never say never, because anything could happen. Like, we're always open to new opportunities, but probably not. I really don't believe you can do both, right? If our goal is to be a big management company and our software is a competitive advantage, then we're not going to give it away to other people, right? Uber's not going to let other cab companies use that platform they've developed. Also, it would, I think, just really fragment the company in terms of like our software. You couldn't really use our software to run your management business unless you changed your management business to be exactly like Castle, right? All kinds of decisions that we've made about how we run our business are hard-coded into the software, and it's designed specifically around that business model. So we'd have to make we'd have to spend a serious amount of time and energy expanding the platform to make it something that other people could use. Again, you never say never. There's always opportunities there, but there's no plans to do that right now, and I'd be surprised if that happens.
Makes sense. Question from Danny Plutelman. Any fees that you charge the tenant that are a revenue stream for you? Application fees, late fees, pet fees?
No, we do not right now. There are no application fees, and the tenants do pay a fee if they make it to the final stage of application and are doing a background check on them, but that fee just goes to cover the background check. We don't make any money on it. Perhaps something that could happen down there, and something like pet fees or late fees, that goes straight to the owner. We don't keep any of it. Our philosophy is we're going to make more money in the long run by giving all that stuff to the owner and making people love Castle than we are going to by getting an extra $30 from the late fee here or there. Same with application fees. we'd rather get way more applicants to a property and not make those fees. Now, I think in part of that is also market specific. If you're managing a property in San Francisco, you're not going to really hurt your application by charging application fees. And in fact, it might be actually a helpful way to screen people. In a lower income market like Detroit, you do hurt yourself doing that. And frankly, we don't want to be making our money by charging fees that we don't really think are necessary to a population who we know is going to have a harder time affording them than others.
Okay, sure, makes sense. Question from Jordan Bellevue. What kind of rates do you guys pay the team in the Philippines?
That's a great question. I'm not going to disclose salaries. I actually personally have no opposition to it. And actually internally at Castle, all salaries are transparent. So everyone on the team can see what everyone else is making. But I wouldn't feel comfortable disclosing someone else's salary without checking with them to see if it was okay first.
Well, can you tell us this? Is it a salary versus an hourly? Or is it an hour?
Yes, it is a salaried position. So it's not based on number of hours.
Even though they're not even though they're a contractor. Okay, got it. Interesting.
Exactly.
So you actually told us something even more interesting, Max, and that is that salaries are fully transparent within the company. That sounds a little crazy. How did you make that decision, and do you ever get any pushback? And do you ever feel like is there full buy-in for that?
Yes, there is. So we actually made sure we got buy-in before we implemented that policy. I mean, our entire attitude is default to transparency. So unless there's a really good reason to have something not be visible to everyone in the company, then it is, right? So for example, certain pieces of employee paperwork are not visible to everyone in the company because they contain social security numbers,
sure.
Right? That's a great reason to keep something secret. Me and Tim and Scott, my co-founders, might have notes from a meeting where we discuss personal things and we won't make those public. But anyone else in the company, they can go back and see notes from every meeting, even if they weren't in the meeting. They can see the notes from the early days when we were first building the company. With salary transparency specifically, I think it, not to get too big picture, but the taboo against talking about money was intentionally created by the wealthy to keep poor people from rising up against them. And I think that that ethos still maintains at companies to this day. I mean, the reason there's usually so much pushback around open salaries is not because the salaries are open, it's because people discover that there's really unfair compensation.
A disparity of pay, yeah.
And you're not fixing the problem by having hidden salaries, you're just sweeping it under the rug. I think if some people here make a lot more than others, but you know what? An account manager understands that a software developer makes more than them. That's like market rate, that's market conditions. But if we explain our reasoning fairly and transparently, I think so far people have been really appreciative of it. And I will add too that it has been definitively demonstrated that salary transparency is a policy that companies that one of the most effective companies' policies can implement to remove gender and kind of other discriminatory pay gaps. So it's something we wanted to get in place early on to set us up for success down the road.
So what's interesting, the caveat you have to give here is that transparency is not always a helpful thing. Transparency is good when you have good culture. If you have bad culture and you introduce transparency, that's going to be a real rocky ride. So we can say that this is something to aspire to, but the thing that it drives is more important, and that is good culture. So you have to be committed to that before you just dive in.
And absolutely. And again, I think a lot of this stuff, it's hard to add on top later. It has to be there early on from day one. And we, one advantage that I think we really had was we had all worked at other startups. We'd learned a lot, both about what to do, but also what not to do. And we knew from day one at Castle that we were aiming to build something big and something meaningful. And maybe we won't get there, but we wanted to put the systems and infrastructure in place from day one so that it could be organic to the company and not feel like we just sort of read about it in a magazine and then tried to glom it on top of what already existed,
Yeah, that's awesome. The thing that's great about a startup, it's so hard and it can be so soul crushing at times. You might as well run it the way that you want. You might as well align it with your deepest most core values, the things that you will not waver in, not the things, as you said, that you read about in a magazine. So I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely. I mean, we have, you know, I really, it's hard to keep this in your head always, but I really try to have the attitude of, if I'm not enjoying this and finding this meaningful, then why am I even doing it? Because even if I make $1 billion in 10 years, it won't be worth it if I wasn't happy doing what I was doing. And, you know, we have you know, one of the things we say at Castle is, you know, we have a company mission. Our company mission is to make investing in real estate as easy as buying a stock, and finding a rental property as easy as booking a hotel room. But our cultural mission is to help everyone on the team achieve self-actualization through a radical life philosophy involving transparency, openness, and receptiveness to feedback. And in terms of how we run the company inside, that cultural mission is just as important. And it's smart business too, because look, like, we have been able to recruit a better team than most property management companies, because we've been able to find people who wouldn't want to go into the property management industry, but they want to come work for Castle because they feel like they're becoming a part of something a bit bigger. Not to toot our own horn too much, we screw plenty of things up all the time.
Of course,
so
yeah.
Believe me, full of flaws, but.
And clearly it's working. Around 700 doors in under 24 months. Alex has had the last question of the day, which is, how do you market for new owners? And we're not going to answer it, because the answer
keep them wanting more
is going to come at the PM Grow Summit. The numbers that you're talking about, I assume it's going to get faster over time, but the growth rate that you're talking about as is quite enviable for quite a few companies. So we do want to hear more. We want to hear how you're marketing, how are you acquiring customers, how are you branding, and we're going to talk all about that at the PM Grow Summit. It's going to be in West Palm Beach in Florida in January 2017. Max is going to be both a panelist on our Bleeding Edge Tech panel as well as a speaker. Max, I'm incredibly grateful for your time today, and I am looking forward to seeing you in January, my man.
Hey, thanks for having me. This was super fun. Audience, thanks for being here, and I can't wait to come to the Grow Summit. It's going to be a blast.
You guys can find out more details at pmgrowsummit.com. Have a great day. We'll see you soon, closers.
Take care.